Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Bloomberg UK. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. So it's the final day of campaigning before the UK general election. Labour has slipped to its worst rating in the Bloomberg poll of polls, with its lead over Rishi Sunak's governing Conservatives also hitting its lowest point of the campaign. Regardless, the opposition leader Keir Starmer remains on course to win the keys to 10 Downing Street in Thursday's vote. Now, let's discuss all of this with Camilla Cavendish, former head of the Downing Street Policy Unit under Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron, and Mike Brewer, interim chief executive of the Resolution Foundation, an independent think tank focused on improving the living standards for those on low to middle income. So thank you both for joining us. Camilla, let's start with you. What do you think this campaign is actually, what this election is about? It feels like more of, a decision against the Tories than actually real conviction of what the country needs in terms of growth.
I think that's right. I think after 14 years, it was likely that the pendulum would swing anyway, but the dissatisfaction with the Conservatives is huge. I think a lot of people may not vote at all. Former Conservative voters are just have had it with that party. But as you say, there isn't necessarily such a positive surge of support for Labour. I think Keir Starmer has played it brilliantly, because we've seen not only the last few years of the Conservatives self-sabotaging at every moment. You know, we had Partygate under Boris Johnson. We had Brexit, which is now a majority of the UK thinks was a mistake. Not only that, but the campaign, I'm afraid, Rishi Sunak has stumbled again and again. And Keir Starmer has, all he's had to do, actually, is play it safe, look like a sensible, decent human being, and actually not given a huge amount of detail about policy. So I think if he had given a bit more detail, people might be feeling a little bit more positive about him. Mm-hmm. But the truth is there will be a lot of tactical voting, and there will be a sigh of relief, I'm afraid, if there's a new government which offers some stability. Yeah. And your point on growth, I mean, what a lot of businesses and investors want now is political stability, which means hopefully 5 years of a government that doesn't keep changing Prime Minister and that has a clear industrial policy.
Yeah, and that's, pro-business, which we seem to have with this Labour Party. Mike, what do you think this election is being voted on? And actually, what do people want to see in terms of their top priority and changes?
Well, the Conservatives have tried to make it a vote about tax cuts, and Labour instead have offered us, I guess, a manifesto where they have a lot of ambitions to do things across a whole range of social and public policy, but maybe not too much detail. But I would want to focus on one exception where Labour, I think, have provided a great deal of detail, and that's in their agenda for the labour markets, both what they say about the minimum wage, but also what they say about introducing new employment rights for workers and a fair deal in the social care sector. I think there's a great deal of crunch there, a great deal of detail there, with a set of proposals that could make a big difference to the working lives of several million voters. So I think that
Mike, you seem to argue also that that actually there are very few people that are really engaged with the manifestos of the parties, that they're interested, of course, in the scandals. We had Gamblegate, we had Rishi Sunak leaving D-Day earlier. But apart from that, people haven't been following that closely the election policy, the manifestos. Is that fair?
Oh, that's definitely fair. Yes, we know that we know that from media tracking data in the last few weeks, that people have been more focused on the plight of that poor teenage boy in Tenerife than they have about the detail in the manifesto. But I think that's normal. I don't think there's anything different about this election from previous elections. People know that the economy has been struggling for the last 14 years, that living standards have hardly been growing. So there are big issues at stake. People can see the state of public services around them. I think people know there are issues at stake. But of course, the detail of the manifesto matters to wonks like us, to journalists and news is right. You report it, but of course it never cuts through to everybody in the population.
So, Camilla, the Tories are working on taxes, and it sees Labour actually looking at the workplace. How will it change under Labour?
Well, I think Mike's point is really important, that actually he's right. One of the things that Labour have been clearest about for 2 years now is that they will bring in from day one a series of new employment rights. A lot of businesses have been very quiet in their response to this because they tend to, they're seeing a Labour victory as inevitable and they haven't wanted to make a fuss about it. However, given that one of our only selling propositions now is still our flexible labour market compared to the rest of Europe. I think businesses are quite worried about unfair dismissal rights, for example, the probationary periods. There's been a discussion about introducing the right to disconnect. There's a whole series of different things in there, some of which I agree with Mike would be really important for people in the gig economy, would lead to less insecure work. There are some other things where I fear we're going to see a rash of employment tribunals, and that is actually not going to be good for anybody, in my opinion.
Mike, your reaction to that? And also, again, we've seen some proposals for the fair pay agreement, for example, in social care, but a lot of the details have been lost. And as Camilla was saying, they haven't really been pushed to give firm answers, maybe because they're so far ahead in the polls.
Well, Labour have said that this is one of their priorities, and of course the first thing they will need to do is consult widely on the detail. And yes, it is true that some businesses will not be keen on paying their low-paid workers more or extending more rights to their workers. But I think the Labour government will be hoping that any discomfort among business will be sort of offset by the kind of stability, the reassurance, the kind of the sensible government is in charge now stability kind of line that Rachel Reeves is so keen to put out as well. But there are details to be worked out. There will inevitably be a discussion between trade unions who may want more rights for workers and businesses, some of whom may want less. I mean that's the messy business of government, and I think it's right that Labour comes to that in the next few months.
Fiscally, it's going to be a nightmare for whoever comes into power, frankly, because we've seen it called the worst economic and fiscal inheritance for any government, Camilla, since the war. Yeah. So, I mean, how much space do they have?
Well, this is the key question, Francine. I mean, the pandemic spending has hit every Western country, and Britain's debt to GDP ratio, I think, is at a 70-year high, as you say, since the war. There isn't much room to manoeuvre. Rachel Reeves is absolutely right to be focusing on growth. They're absolutely right to be seeking some sort of a new deal with Brussels, although it's not at all clear what Brussels would be willing to offer. I do think the Ukraine war and Britain's defence and military capability will help us in that respect. And I think we're seeing all sorts of changes right across Europe right now, with a series of incumbent governments either falling or under pressure. So that landscape is actually increasingly complicated. She's right to focus on growth, and she talks about a partnership with business. Yeah. That is what is not clear is whether Labour's view is that that's a sort of statist kind of partnership where they are offering the terms, or whether it's a genuine collaboration. And I think, as Mike said, I don't think any of that is set in stone yet. I actually think Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have been doing a lot of listening to big business. I don't know if they've had much time to listen to small business yet. And the next few months are going to be critical, I think, in determining the outlines of actually that strategy.
And Mike, again, if you look at the policies, I mean, the NHS, other public services, frankly, are in crisis. The growth is anemic. The tax burden is at a post-World War II high. So how much growth can actually the Labour Party deliver?
I mean, this is certainly not the economic or fiscal inheritance that any chancellor wants to get, right? I mean, yeah, growth has been terrible, and the next government will really hitting hard against a set of fiscal rules, where both everyone agreed we need to get public debt to fall. So the Labour's strategy so far has been to promise sort of as little as possible, and everyone is then crossing their fingers and hoping that either with a bit of stability that the growth returns, or we get lucky. But there's definitely equally well a chance that we could get unlucky. And the last set of forecasts on the public finances made by the Office of Budget Responsibility were thought to be quite optimistic. So there is equally well a chance that Labour could get unlucky when they get into power. So it's very, very tough. What will they have to do if things turn out badly? They're either going to have to modify their debt rule, or they're going to have to find some taxes to put up, out of the ones they haven't yet ruled out.
Yeah. Camilla, what happens to the Conservative Party the day after the election?
I was just going to say, of course, on your chart, the thing we haven't talked about is the US. I mean, the bigger story here is obviously that Europe itself is falling way behind the US.
Yes.
So that is the context. It's very unclear what happens to the Conservatives the day after the election. I mean, the lowest share of vote I think the Conservatives have had is 160 seats under William Hague. And that is about the minimum you need to mount an effective opposition, because you have to have enough people to do the research, to be on select committees, I mean, to do the work of Parliament that means actually mounting a proper opposition. It seems possible that the Conservatives will go below 160. It's possible the Liberal Democrats will become the second largest party. And if that happens, I think the Liberal Democrats will tend to be attacking Labour from the left.
Yep.
It's fascinating. Nigel Farage, as you know, is standing in Clacton for Reform. Reform might get maybe 3 MPs at the absolute most. But if Farage does win that seat, people are talking about whether he would become a future leader of the Conservative Party. It's anything is possible. And I guess a great deal of this is dependent on what the makeup is of the actual MPs in Parliament. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, may become the first incumbent Chancellor to lose his seat. He's a moderate. There are a number of people like him. If they go, then the Conservatives will move further to the right. But again, some predictions are that actually some of the Brexiteers in the so-called red wall are likely to go, and that will shift the party back to the centre. So it's who knows?
All up in the air. Who knows?
Up in the air.
As always, thank you so much. Camilla Cavendish, former head of the Downing Street Policy Unit, and Mike Brewer, interim chief executive of the Resolution Foundation. Coming up, how realistic are Labour's growth targets? We take a closer look at what a win for Keir Starmer would mean for the UK economy. That's next, and this is Bloomberg.
We understand deeply how important it is to balance a budget. We're never going to put the British economy at risk. But yes, absolutely. You know, we do have an ambition to take corporation tax down to 15% over the course of 5 years, raise the threshold on VAT, abolish things like IR35. And by the way, a big one for us is actually to seize the opportunity that Brexit offered, which is to slash as much of the red tape as possible, to allow small and medium-sized businesses especially to operate, without, raising, as I said, the VAT threshold, getting rid of a lot of the red tape and the regulations. Again, as someone who ran my own business, and I know how a lot of these regulations, however well-intended, unfortunately, all they really do is slow people down, discourage growth, and line the pockets of lawyers.
This sounds remarkably similar to what Liz Truss was saying. And she got a very bad reaction from the bond market. Why is what you are suggesting not Truss
really
2.0?
Really simple. What Liz Truss did, the thing that the markets did not like about that budget were simply that there were no sacrifices made on the spending side. So if you're going to, so essentially it wasn't the tax cuts that were the problem, it was the unfunded tax cuts. And one of the things that, again, Reform are very clear about is that it's not just about cutting taxes per se or anything like that. It's also about making sure that the British people get much better value for the taxes that they are actually paying. I mean, my immediate family work in the National Health Service, right? They're heroes to me. Obviously, the frontline NHS workers, I think, are amazing people. As I said in my speech, they work really hard for us. But almost everybody I speak to in the NHS will tell me day after day after day, how much waste there is, how much, frankly, incompetent administration that there is going on. And so it's not just about, we are spending more money than ever in the NHS. Waiting lists are at all-time highs. So we can essentially make productivity something that is actually meaningful.
But you have the issue I think the markets would focus on would be a sequencing problem. You come in, you cut taxes. That's something that happens quickly. Reform of the NHS is something that happens slowly. And it's that duration mismatch that you've got that would cause the market concern. You can't guarantee. You can guarantee the former, you can guarantee the tax cuts, but you can't guarantee the latter, which is that you are going to be able to deliver the efficiencies. Many people have tried, very few have succeeded.
So look, I agree with that statement, right? Engaging with markets, understanding markets is actually really important. Frankly, Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss actually didn't engage with markets, right? The attitude was markets will do what markets will do. Markets will actually look at, yes, the sequencing is issue, but markets will actually look at what your forecasts are. Markets will actually look at, what is the budget going to be this year, where are we trending? So again, I can tell you the people who are at the helm of making policy for reform are sophisticated. They understand that everything that we put forward as policy, not only will it make sense from a sequencing perspective, so we aren't blowing up big holes in the budget, we will also make sure that the forecasts are very clear about how we're going to be delivering the efficiencies and massive improvements in public services.
Well, that was Yusuf, Velocity Black founder and Reform UK donor, speaking to Bloomberg's Guy Johnson. Yusuf is among the political party donors we've been speaking to during the election campaign. So polls suggesting the Labour Party is set to win this week's election. For a closer look at what that win can actually mean for growth in the UK, we're joined by Dan Hansen, our chief UK economist for Bloomberg Economics. Dan, a lot going on in my head there. When you look at what the BOE would be worried about under a Labour government, is it workplace? Is it how they do fiscally?
Yeah, I mean, it is fiscal. But if you look at Labour's manifesto, it's quite striking about how modest their offering is. You've got £9 billion of spending pledges funded by about £9 billion of tax rises. So in the context of a £3 trillion economy, that's pretty small. So what the BOE are going to be watching on election night, yeah, they'll see. Obviously, they'll be looking at the results come in. But I think in terms of does it affect their path going into the second half of this year, I don't think so. Of course, we have a budget probably in the autumn. That will be the main moment. But as things stand right now, does what either political party has announced change their thinking? I don't think so.
I mean, we have anemic growth at the moment. How's Labour going to achieve their targets?
Well, that's another great question. And it's really interesting that Keir Starmer's talking about this 2.5%, or at least 2.5% growth. And that's the sort of growth we had prior to the financial crisis. It's not something we've had since here in the UK. And it feels to me that it's sort of getting there is based on two things. One is this idea of bringing certainty and getting rid of what they call the chaos. And they think that will bring a growth dividend, maybe. On the other side, there's the fiscal element to it, which, as I say, is very, very modest. So I think we heard Mike Brewer say there, they might get lucky. But it doesn't feel to me that what Labour are saying will be the source of that growth. It might be something external, something exogenous that propels the UK economy faster than everyone has expected. Equally, there's a big risk on the downside as well, and we've been hit by a lot of negative shocks recently, and they need to be prepared for that outcome as well.
And then, I mean, this feels like not a huge market event because basically it's a centre-left party.
Well, that's the thing, and I think the interesting thing for investors here is, and a lot of my Bloomberg colleagues have been writing about it, is the difference between now the UK seems sort of a beacon of stability if compared to what might be going on elsewhere in the world. So there's been this sort of switch around, and that possibly, going to one more point, going back to the original question about growth, that might be a boon to growth as well. So I think you're right, this isn't a big market event domestically, but when you look at the UK in the context of global markets, actually it's quite a positive outcome for the UK to have a sort of stable centrist government.
Dan, thank you so much. Dan Hansen there from Bloomberg Economics. Now, coming up, a poll suggests that the Labour Party is set to win the UK election by a landslide. We take a closer look at some of the most likely outcomes from tomorrow's vote. This is Bloomberg. Now, as you've heard, Bloomberg's poll of polls shows Keir Starmer's opposition Labour Party firmly in the lead ahead of Rishi Sunak's governing Conservatives. Bloomberg's UK correspondent, Lizzie Burden, joins us now to walk us through some of the possible outcomes. Hi, Lizzie.
Hi, Francine. Yes, the odds are all about what size of majority Labour will get because the polls all assume that Labour is going to win. So let me take you through the scenarios that the bookies are taking bets on in order of likelihood. Starting with this scenario, a supermajority of 250 plus seats for Labour. It would be unprecedented, and indeed supermajority is a new word in the British political lexicon. It's been imported by the Conservatives to warn against giving Labour untrammelled power, because it would mean that Keir Starmer could get his policy programme through Parliament easily, and it would put pressure on Keir Starmer, in fact, to be bolder when it comes to pursuing economic growth. Actually, as I think you were discussing with Dan Hansen, perhaps that could be a boon for the UK economy. The Institute for Fiscal Studies saying that at the moment the plans look like a gamble on growth. But let me take you to the next most likely scenario according to the bookmakers. This is where Labour would get a majority of 150 plus seats. Now, to put it in context, in 1997, Tony Blair got a 179-seat majority, and Boris Johnson in 2009 got an 80-seat majority. So this would still be pretty good, but it would mean that the Conservatives do not face extinction. Now, let me take you on to the next scenario in order of likelihood, a 50-plus seat majority for Labour. There was a time when this would have seemed like an enormous victory for Labour, pre-Partygate, pre-Liz Truss's 49-day premiership. But now this would probably be a bit of a disappointment. At least the headlines on Friday would, I bet, be all about where did Keir Starmer's big poll lead go? How did the Conservatives manage to stave off defeat? But let me take you on to the next scenario. This is where Labour still wins, but they don't have an outright majority. And it raises the question what Keir Starmer would do. Would he try to form a minority government? Or would he go for a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, which then raises the question, what would Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, try to extract in exchange for his cooperation? Would it be proportional representation, closer ties with Europe? This is not a scenario that the financial markets are likely to enjoy. Finally, the last scenario, a wild card. This is where the Liberal Democrats become the main opposition. They'd have to make serious inroads into Tory heartlands. But since the First World War, you've had Labour or the Conservatives as the official opposition, so it would be a real shake-up of the Westminster two-party system. Not impossible, but pretty unlikely, Francine.
Lizzie, thank you so much. Our UK correspondent there, Lizzie Burden. Now, this is a poll of polls. This is a Bloomberg put-together poll. I think we have it in just a second. We've seen, actually, that lead narrowing between Labour and the Conservatives. You can see that was the latest from yesterday. Labour at 40.5, the Conservatives 20.1. And this is Bloomberg's poll of polls. If you look at the Liberal Democrats, they're at 11.4%. Up next, Bloomberg Brief with Danny Berger and Manus Krani in New York. This is Bloomberg.